Oh, welcome once again to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith, and today is another spooky story. A spooky story from the city of Liverpool, my hometown. And the location of this ghost story is in the Georgian quarter of Liverpool, near town. And there's a specific street where this happened. And the street is in one of the houses that had recently been renovated and turned into flats and apartments. There was a couple we'll call Jack and Jill, who were from the town of Prescott, which is just outside of Liverpool. Now, Jack and Jill had wanted to move into Liverpool city centre, so they were the first tenants to live in the Georgian quarter, in this specific building. Now, the first night that the couple had moved in, strange things had started to happen. There was a strange, sweet smell that filled the living room early hours in the morning, and there were sounds of someone walking slowly up the stairs from the bottom flight to the top that could be heard. Jack was sure that there was a burglar outside the door, and he shouted, "Who's there?" And something knocked a few times on the door. And then when Jack bravely or stupidly opened the door, he found that there was no one there. One night, a week or two later, Jill was sat in bed reading a book when something which almost paralysed her with fear happened. A tall black shadow figure stepped right out of the wall by her bed. He had a top hat on and a long cape. His shirt and collar were white. His neck, face and hands were black and featureless, like a shadow. He picked up a glass of water from the cabinet, lifted it to the blackness of his face, sipped it and then put it back on the cabinet. He then melted back into the wall from which it appeared. When Jack returned home from work that evening, he found Jill in a state outside on the steps of the house. She was shaking and screaming. It took Jack some time to persuade Jill to get back into the building, and when she showed him the glass where the ghost had a drink, he examined it and found that there was a silvery, sticky slime substance, and this is called ectoplasm. And Jack later took the glass, who was to get examined by two of his friends in university who were studying parapsychology, and they intended to have the weird residue analysed, but somehow the specimen that was brought in by Jack had evaporated, even though it was sealed in an airtight tub. Now, 2 or 3 weeks later, the parapsychologists attended Jack and Jill's apartment to do some paranormal investigating. Now, the two parapsychologists ran from the house, absolutely terrified. Their experience after being in one of the rooms was that an invisible hand had stroked both of their faces, and then one weekend, Jill intended to go out on the town drinking with her work friends, but she refused to get in the shower on her own, so she had one of her friends stand outside on guard. Jill's friend Sarah had laughingly agreed to keep watch outside the shower while reading a magazine. Some time later, Jill heard a loud thump. She wiped the water from her eyes, and through the frosted glass of the shower screen she could make out someone in black standing there. It was unmistakably that same top-hatted ghost with the cape. Jill let out a high-pitched scream, then the figure vanished. And when she got out of the shower, she found that the door was wide open. Her friend Sarah had also seen the ghost and had been that freaked out she left the house and swore never to return again. And she still to this day, 30 years later, she refuses to go anywhere near Canning Street. However, there are more terrifying incidents that happened to Jack and Jill. Just a month later, Jack and Jill were in bed. When Jack went to fetch not a pail of water, he went to fetch a snack from the kitchen. Jill sat back, relaxed in the bed. She stretched up her arms and yawned, and as she did so, a pair of icy hands had come from behind the headboard and grabbed her by the wrists. When she looked up, she saw the same ink-jet black shadow figure of the man with no face appearing down at her. But this time she was so scared she passed out. And when she came around, she was sat on the sofa in the living room. Jack had said that enough was enough. They'd had it. They were leaving. And they decided that they'd spend the night in Jack's uncle's house somewhere in Southport, and they would not spend another night in the haunted building. Early in that morning, the couple got the possessions they needed and got into a brand new car. They drove off down Canning Street, and as the car was travelling on Parliament Street, they became aware of that same sweet smell that filled their living room. And this happened just before all supernatural happenings. The driving wheel in Jack's hands had suddenly turned left by itself, as if someone with terrific strength was twisting it. The car veered right and mounted the curb on the corner of Windsor Street, and Jack somehow managed to regain control of his car. Thankfully, there were no pedestrians around at that early hour. Now, Jack was convinced that he was back in control, so Jack continued down Chalmers Street towards Wapping, and once again, that smell filled the car, and something powerful turned the steering wheel sharply left. This time the car swerved down a road past one of the docks. The accelerator pedal was being pressed down by an invisible force, and even though Jack had taken his foot off the clutch, the car had refused to stall. The car was about to turn down a sloping ramp leading into the dock when Jack pulled on the handbrake in a last attempt to stop this possessed car. The car screeched to a halt and turned through 180 degrees and eventually stopped dead. Jack told Jill to get out of the car and stand well out of harm's way, and he drove the car to a car park and left it. Jack and Jill then got a taxi which took them to Southport, and even in the taxi, that same smell filled the air, and the malevolent spirit would not give in. The taxi swerved and the cabbie apologised, saying that his Cackney cab had seemed to be wonky. The steering was wonky somehow, even though he knew for a fact that there was nothing wrong with the vehicle as he'd been driving that all night with no issues. Jack and Jill still to this day do not understand what the malicious ghost tried to victimize them, but thankfully we have more tales to tell about this strange, mysterious ghost. While doing the research for this story, I took a trip to Canning Street, and I ended up speaking to a resident of one of these houses who had invited us to go and investigate a haunted property on Canning Street. And through the stories that she was telling me that she'd experienced, I think we might have found the same building where this malevolent spirit had tormented Jack and Jill. Also, we have found the history of the people who've lived in that building and around the area. So stay tuned for more spooky stories of the Canning Street ghost. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you did enjoy. If so, please hit the like button, share and subscribe. But stay safe. See you next time. Peace.